anything but the Negroes. Anyone but the Negroes. Here we go again. Initially, this nonsense in Egypt started with Kevin Hart's situation. According to the Telegraph article, Netflix drama angers Egyptians by casting black actress as Cleopatra. This movie is produced by Jada Pinkett Smith, who wants to tell stories about black queens. A new Netflix series has sparked a backlash in Egypt by portraying Cleopatra as black. A trailer for the new historical series shows the first century ruler of Egypt as a woman of black African descent. After producer Jada Pinkett Smith, the wife of Will Smith, cited the importance of telling stories about black queens. The decision to cast a black actress in the role of the queen has caused anger in Egypt, where experts have argued that the queen was of European descent and not black. It has been pointed out that the ruler was descended from Ptolemy, a general of Alexander the Great, making the queen of light-skinned Macedonian Greek heritage. The leading Egyptian archaeologist, Dr. Zahi Hawass, has released a statement online saying that Cleopatra was not black. Zahi Hawass is the chairman of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, the SCA, and Undersecretary of State to the Ministry of Culture. He added, "The film that is coming to Netflix is not accurate and gives wrong information on ancient Egypt. Cleopatra was Greek, and she was similar to the queens and princesses of Macedonia. Is this true that Cleopatra was a European? Is it true that Cleopatra was a white woman? When and how did Dr. Zahi Hawass become the authoritative voice of confirmation of who is who?" Dr. Bauval and Thomas Brophy, Ph.D., has a lot to say about Zahi Hawass' deceptive agenda in the book titled Black Genesis: The Prehistoric Origins of Ancient Egypt. In this book, on page 171 and 172, Dr. Bauval and Professor Thomas Brophy shares Chief Diop's silver bullet, the proven scientific method that can determine skin color by the analysis of the melanin content in mummies from ancient Egypt. And he insists that, contrary to the words of the Egyptologists, it was entirely possible to determine the melanin content of ancient mummies by microscopic analysis in the laboratory. Melanin, or more precisely, eumelanin, is a naturally produced polymer responsible for skin pigmentation. It is insoluble and can be preserved for millions of years, such as in the skin of fossilized creatures. Diop claimed that it can be measured in the skin of Egyptian mummies, even through Egyptologists lament that the skin of mummies is tainted by embalming material and thus is no longer acceptable to such analysis. Diop rejected this by showing that although the outer epidermis is where the melanin is usually found, melanocytes are particles deeper in the skin where they are not destroyed by the mummification process. From samples of common Egyptian mummies from the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, Diop was able to show high melanin levels that are not found in white-skinned people. Diop wanted to apply the same analysis to royal mummies kept in Egypt, but the Egyptian authorities refused to give him any samples, not even the few millimeters of skin tissue that are required for such analysis. On page 172 and 173, Diop also reviewed the various statements made by ancient Greeks and Romans who visited Egypt as did Martin Bernal later in Black Athena. Diop asserts that if we accept what the ancient Greeks and Roman writers say, and frankly, there are no good reason why we shouldn't, then we must conclude that the ancient Egyptians were black-skinned. For these writers leave us with no doubt that they saw the Egyptians as dark or black men. Egyptologists, on the other hand, insist that we should not take seriously these ancient writers. A few Greek and Roman writers make clear Diop's point. Herodotus, 450 BCE, who is considered the father of history, states that it is in fact manifest that the Colchidians are Egyptians by race. Several Egyptians told me that in their opinion, the Colchidians were descendants from the soldiers of Sesostris. I had conjectured as much myself from 2 pointers. Firstly, because they have black skin and kinky hair. Aristotle, 320 BCE, the great philosopher and father of scientific thinking, speaks rather derogatorily about the Egyptians, but nonetheless shows that he too regarded them as black skin. Those who are too black are cowards, like, for instance, the Egyptians and Ethiopians. But those who are excessively white are also cowards, as we can see from the example of women. The complexion of courage is between the two, in other words, brown or tanned. Aeschylus, 480 BCE, in his play The Suppliants, comment on an Egyptian ship. I can see the Egyptian crew with their black limbs and white tunics. Apollodorus, 70 BCE, affirms that Egyptos conquered the country of the black-footed ones and called it Egypt after himself. Greek writers, Lucian, 180 BCE, presents a dialogue between two Greeks, Lensinus and Timolas, discussing a young Egyptian boy. Lensinus, this boy is not merely black, he has thick lips and his legs are too thin. His hair worn in a plait behind shows that he is not a free man. On page 175 of the same source. Again, Diop's crowning moment was at UNESCO's symposium in January 1974 in Cairo, where he and a colleague, Professor Obenga, carefully presented their scientific findings to a large audience of Egyptologists and anthropologists from all parts of the world. The UNESCO organizers, however, were clearly impressed by Diop and commissioned him to write the entry on their origins of the pharaohs and their general history of Africa, published a few years later in 1981. Some very senior French Egyptologists, notably Professor Jean Vercoter and Professor Jean Lecamp, had been very impressed with Diop's professional presentation. In reality, the resistance to accept or even consider Diop's thesis came not from Egyptologists in general, but specifically from high Egyptian officials, as is well demonstrated by Dr. Zahi Hawass. Now, according to Denison University article titled "The Modern Racial Politics of Cleopatra," it says, the most prominent gaps are found in Cleopatra's mother's identity and her grandmother's. In 2009, a group of BBC presenters, archaeologists, proposed, based on analysis of a body claimed to be that of Arsinoe, Cleopatra's sister, that their mother had an African skeleton. It has also variously been argued that her paternal grandmother was indigenous Egyptian and so potentially black. Despite these attempts to understand the anomalies in Cleopatra's family history, for the most part, when asked, most scholars and students of the Greco-Roman world will say without hesitation, Cleopatra the VII myth. Most of you don't understand that there were more than one Cleopatras. So Cleopatra number 7 was white of Macedonian descent, as were all of the Ptolemy rulers who lived in Egypt. They often even dismissed the speculations that she may not be white as not credible. The reality, however, is that white and black are not ancient categories of race or ethnicity, and Egyptian, Macedonian, Greek, and African have different modern meanings and invoke different political and social affiliations than they did in antiquity. Even the qualification that Cleopatra was a Macedonian Greek echoes the contemporary disputes over the use of the name Macedonia. Trying to decide into which of these identities Cleopatra fits is like putting a round peg into a square hole. More importantly, when scholars perpetuate the idea that her family tree defines her Greekness, Egyptianness, Africanness, or even her race at all, they perpetuate the idea that the modern racial identities we inhabit are universal across time and place. But Cleopatra does not have a race as we understand it, and to make any claims to being able to identify the true racial background of Cleopatra is to perpetuate a modern political position. She cannot be at least 50% Egyptian or pure Macedonian Greek, because such things are modern, socially and politically important and structure forms of identity. Race is not a genetic truth. According to the BBC article, Cleopatra's mother was African. Cleopatra, the last Egyptian pharaoh, renowned for her beauty, was part of Africa, says a BBC team, which believes it has found her sister's tomb. Queen Cleopatra was a descendant of Ptolemy, the Macedonian general who ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great. But remains of the queen's sister, Princess Arsinoe, found in Ephesus, Turkey, indicate that her mother had an African skeleton. Experts have described the results as a real sensation. The discovery was made by Hilke Thur of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. It is unique in the life of an archaeologist to find the tomb and the skeleton of a member of Ptolemaic dynasty, she said. What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
Listen, Genesis chapter 11 verse 10 explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. If you repeat this back, Genesis 14 verse 13, Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was black. Abraham, born in the city of a black man, called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me do some explaining. Abraham, Isaac was Jacob had 12 sons, for real, and these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10.